Julian Croft, a reclusive billionaire protector forged in the crucible of war and loss, returned to the sprawling, manicured estate of his fallen comrade, only to be paralyzed by the sight of the man's daughter, Maya, in a state of chilling neglect. Her pristine white dress, a mockery of innocence, was a stark contrast to the hollow, haunted look in her eyes and the profound silence that had consumed a home once vibrant with the echoes of laughter and life. The air, once thick with the scent of David's favorite cigars and the sweet perfume of his wife's roses, was now sterile, thin, and cold, smelling only of lemon polish and something else, something acrid and hidden. Why was the beloved child of a decorated hero living like a ghost in her own magnificent house? And who, truly, was the woman with the camera-ready smile who now ruled this silent kingdom? A woman who smiled for the world but locked doors behind her back. The gates of the Vance estate, wrought iron behemoths that had once seemed welcoming, now felt like the bars of a gilded cage. Julian's car, a silent, black sedan, crunched to a halt on the gravel driveway. He killed the engine and for a long moment simply stared at the house. It was a monument to his best friend's success, a testament to a life lived fully, a life cut brutally short in a desert half a world away. He and David had made a pact, sealed with blood and bourbon under a star-dusted Afghan sky. If anything happened, they would look after the other's family. It was a soldier's promise, the most sacred bond Julian knew. David had left behind his most precious treasure, his 6-year-old daughter Maya, and Julian, haunted by his own ghosts, had sworn to be her guardian, her protector, her unwavering shield. He had been away for 6 months, closing a difficult chapter of his own past in a remote mountain cabin, deliberately cutting himself off from the world. But his promise to David was a homing beacon in his soul, and it had finally called him back. He had sent word of his visit, a courtesy he now regretted. It had given her time to prepare. Eleanor, David's second wife, the woman he had married in a whirlwind romance just a year before his final deployment. Julian had never trusted her. Her smiles were too bright, her affections too performative. She was a beautiful, polished vessel that seemed utterly empty on the inside. He stepped out of the car, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the late afternoon sun. The air was still unnaturally so. No birdsong, no distant hum of a lawnmower. The silence pressed in on him, heavy and suffocating. He walked up the stone steps, his hand clenching into a fist before he forced it to relax and press the doorbell. The chimes echoed inside, a cheerful melodic sound that was a jarring contradiction to the oppressive atmosphere. The door was opened by Eleanor herself. She was flawless as always. Her blonde hair was swept into an elegant chignon. Her silk blouse was the color of cream, and her smile was a dazzling work of art. It didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, were cold and assessing. "Julian, what a wonderful surprise," she said, her voice a smooth, practiced melody. "I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow." "My plans changed," Julian said, his voice a low rumble. He stepped past her into the foyer, his gaze sweeping the cavernous space. The grand piano where David used to play silly songs for Maya was closed, its surface gleaming under a thick coat of wax. The family photos that had once crowded the mantelpiece were gone, replaced by a single, large, professionally shot portrait of Eleanor and David. David looked stiff and uncomfortable. Eleanor looked triumphant. "I was just about to put Maya down for her nap," Eleanor said, closing the door behind him. The sound of the latch clicking into place sent a shiver down Julian's spine. "She's been a bit under the weather. It's been a difficult time for her, adjusting." "I'd like to see her," Julian stated. It was not a request. Eleanor's smile tightened by a fraction of a millimeter. "Of course, but perhaps it's best not to disturb her. She needs her routine." The child psychologist says routine is paramount for a child processing grief. Julian's eyes narrowed. He noticed it then, a small detail that his training had taught him to never ignore. A glint of metal high on the frame of the door leading to the upstairs hallway. It was a bolt lock, the kind one installs for security, but it was on the outside. A cold knot of dread formed in his stomach. "I've been away a long time, Eleanor. I won't disturb her. I just want to see my goddaughter." He moved toward the grand staircase, his steps silent and deliberate. He felt her hesitation, a flicker of panic in her cold eyes before she smoothed it over with another brilliant smile. "Very well, but just for a moment. Her well-being is my absolute priority. You understand." He understood far more than she could ever imagine. He understood the chill in the air wasn't from the air conditioning. He understood that the silence in this house wasn't peaceful. It was terrified. As he ascended the stairs, the scent of bleach grew stronger, a desperate attempt to scrub away a stain that wasn't physical. With every step, the soldier in him, the protector he had always been, awoke from a long slumber, every sense on high alert. He was no longer just a visitor. He was on a mission, and the objective was at the top of these stairs. Eleanor led him down the long, carpeted hallway, her heels sinking silently into the plush runner. The doors to the master suite were open, revealing a room that looked like a page from a design magazine, impersonal and untouched. But another door at the very end of the hall was closed. It was a simple white door, identical to the others, but it felt different. It felt like a final barrier, a seal on a tomb. A faint scratching sound came from within, a sound so small he almost missed it. "She's a very quiet child," Eleanor said, her voice a little too loud in the hallway. "She spends hours in her room, lost in her own little world. It's her safe space." Julian reached the door before she did. He saw the faint scuff marks near the bottom, the slight discoloration of the paint around the new, external bolt lock he'd spotted from the foyer. His blood ran cold. He placed his hand on the doorknob, his knuckles brushing against the cold, unforgiving metal of the lock. He didn't need a key. He didn't need permission. He looked at Eleanor, and for the first time since he'd arrived, he let her see the abyss that lay behind his calm facade. He let her see the promise he'd made to a dying friend. "Open it," he said, his voice devoid of all warmth, a flat, hard command that tolerated no argument. Eleanor's composure finally fractured. A flicker of genuine fear crossed her face before she replaced it with indignation. "I beg your pardon? This is my house and that is my stepdaughter's room. You have no right to open the door." Now each word was a chip of ice. He didn't raise his voice, but the sheer, unyielding force of his will filled the narrow hallway, pressing in on her, suffocating her practiced lies. He saw the truth in her eyes. She wasn't protecting a child's routine. She was guarding a prison. With a trembling hand, she fumbled with the bolt and turned the knob. The door swung inward with a soft click, revealing the room beyond. And the sight that met Julian's eyes shattered the last vestiges of his civilian composure, plunging him back into the heart of a darkness he thought he had left behind. The room was surgically clean, almost bare. A small, neat bed, a single empty bookshelf, a window with the curtains drawn tight, blocking out the afternoon sun. And in the center of the floor, on a small, worn rug, sat Maya. She was a tiny, fragile doll, swimming in a dress that was impeccably clean but hung loosely on her thin frame. Her beautiful, coiled hair, which her father had loved to braid, was dull and brittle. She was staring at her hands, which were clasped tightly in her lap. She didn't look up. She didn't acknowledge their presence. She was a statue of sorrow, a silent monument to a broken heart. Julian stepped into the room, his big frame seeming to shrink the already small space. He knelt down slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. "Maya," he said, his voice softer than he knew it could be. "It's me. It's Uncle Julian." There was no response, not a flicker of recognition. Her eyes remained fixed on her hands. He reached out, his hand hovering over her small shoulder before he let it fall back to his side. He saw the faint, yellowish tint of a fading bruise on her delicate forearm, a handprint just starting to disappear. Eleanor saw him looking and rushed to speak. "Oh, that. She took a tumble at the park last week. So clumsy. You know how children are." The lie was slick and easy, but it hung in the air like poison. His gaze drifted from the bruise to a piece of paper sticking out from under the bed. He reached for it slowly. It was a child's drawing, done in crayon. A small, stick figure with curly hair was inside a black box with a lock on the door. Outside the box stood a much larger figure, a woman with a wide, red, screaming mouth and sharp, jagged teeth. It was a postcard from hell, a silent scream for help. He tucked the drawing into his pocket, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. "She seems tired," Julian said, his voice dangerously level as he stood up. "I think some fresh air would do her good." "I told you, she's not feeling well," Eleanor insisted, stepping forward to block his path to Maya. It was then that the specific horror from the prompt's title unfolded. A small, cruel act of domestic tyranny that laid bare the monster beneath the silk blouse. Eleanor, trying to reassert her control, went to a small tray on the dresser. On it was a pitcher of water and a glass of orange juice. "She hasn't had her juice. She needs her vitamins." She picked up the glass and brought it to Maya. "Here, darling. Drink this for Mommy Eleanor." Maya flinched violently at the word mommy. Her small body trembled, and as Eleanor pushed the glass toward her, her hand jerked, and a tiny droplet of orange juice spilled onto the pristine white collar of her dress. Eleanor's mask didn't just slip, it disintegrated. Her face transformed into a mask of cold, vicious rage. Her voice dropped to a venomous hiss. "You clumsy, ungrateful little brat. Look what you've done." This was a new dress. She grabbed the glass and, with a flick of her wrist, started to pour the rest of the sticky, orange liquid over Maya's head. The little girl let out a choked sob, her hands flying up to protect her face. "No, please. I'm sorry. Please," she begged, her voice a tiny, raw whisper, the first words Julian had heard her speak. Something inside Julian snapped. The carefully constructed dam of control he had built over years of discipline and grief burst into 1,000 pieces. He moved faster than Eleanor could register, his large hand clamping around her wrist like a vice, stopping the flow of juice midair. The glass fell from her numb fingers and shattered on the floor. "That," Julian Croft yelled, his voice a thunderous roar that shook the very walls of the silent house, "is enough." The force of his voice, a sound of pure, protective rage, threw Eleanor back a step. She stared at him, her mouth agape, genuine shock and fear in her eyes. The monster had been seen. Julian ignored her completely. He knelt before the sobbing, trembling child, his heart breaking for her terror. He gently took her small, sticky hands in his own. He made a vow then, a silent, unbreakable oath sworn in the wreckage of his friend's home. He would not just protect this child. He would give her back her voice. He would give her back her father's memory. He would give her back the son. And he would personally, methodically, and completely destroy the woman who had tried to steal it all away. His rage subsided as quickly as it had erupted, replaced by an icy, focused calm. He gently wiped Maya's face with his handkerchief, his movements slow and deliberate. He looked at the shattered glass and the spreading orange puddle on the floor, then at Eleanor, who was scrambling to regain her composure. "Pack a bag for her," he said, his voice low and steady again, but now edged with granite. "Clothes for a few days." Eleanor's shock morphed back into defiance. "Absolutely not. You can't just come in here and assault me, and try to take my child. I'll call the police." "Call them," Julian said, his gaze unwavering, "and I will show them the lock on the outside of this door. I will show them this drawing. I will ask them to have a doctor examine the bruise on her arm. And I will tell them I heard a 6-year-old girl beg her stepmother not to pour juice on her head. How do you think that will play out for the grieving widow, Eleanor?" Her face paled. The threat of public exposure of her carefully crafted image being shattered was the only weapon she understood. She was a creature of surfaces, and he was threatening to show the world the ugliness that lay beneath. "You don't understand our situation," she stammered, falling back on her well-worn script of gaslighting. "She's a deeply troubled child. Her father's death. It's been devastating. She has outbursts. She makes things up. This is just one of her episodes. I understand perfectly, Julian replied, his voice a silken threat. He stood up, gently lifting Maya into his arms. The little girl clung to him, burying her face in his shoulder, her small body trembling. She weighed next to nothing. You have 5 minutes to pack a bag. If you are not downstairs with it by then, I will make that call. And I assure you, my lawyers are far better than yours. He walked out of the room without a backward glance, carrying his precious cargo. He could feel Maya's small, ragged breaths against his neck. He walked down the grand staircase and into the cold, sterile living room. He sat on the edge of a stiff, uncomfortable sofa, holding her, rocking her gently, murmuring soft, meaningless words of comfort. He was a soldier, a businessman, a man who moved in a world of concrete actions and calculated risks. But in that moment, holding the terrified, silent child of his best friend, he was only one thing: a protector. He had found his mission. True to his word, Eleanor appeared at the top of the stairs exactly 5 minutes later. She carried a small pink suitcase. Her face was a mask of cold fury, but she had complied. She knew she had lost this round. She descended the stairs and placed the bag on the floor. You'll have her back by the weekend, she said, her voice tight. We have the Children's Benevolence Fund Gala. It's very important. Julian looked at her, a flicker of contempt in his eyes. Don't worry about the gala, Eleanor. I have a feeling you're going to be otherwise engaged. He stood, adjusted Maya in his arms, picked up the small suitcase, and walked out the front door without another word. The door clicked shut behind them, sealing off the cold, silent house. As he settled Maya into the plush leather seat of his car, she let out a long, shuddering sigh, a sound of profound release. The iron gates of the estate slid open before them, and as they drove away, Julian glanced in the rearview mirror. The grand house, once a symbol of his friend's happiness, now looked like nothing more than an ornate, empty tomb. The real battle, he knew, had just begun. He wasn't just taking Maya away for a few days. He was liberating her, and he would never, ever let her go back. His first destination was not one of his many luxurious properties, but a secure, private medical clinic run by a doctor he trusted implicitly. Dr. Eris Thorne was a man who understood discretion and trauma. Julian carried Maya inside, and Eris met them with a calm, reassuring presence. While Julian waited in a quiet room, his mind a whirlwind of strategic planning, Dr. Thorne and a gentle, kind-faced nurse named Clara examined Maya. They didn't push her or frighten her. They spoke in soft voices, used toys to help her communicate, and slowly, carefully, documented everything. The report Eris delivered to Julian an hour later was clinical, precise, and utterly damning. Malnutrition, dehydration, several healing and faded bruises in various stages, consistent with repeated grabbing and squeezing. But the worst damage, Eris explained, wasn't visible. She's in a state of dissociative trauma, Julian. The silence, the lack of effect, it's a defense mechanism. She's retreated somewhere inside herself where she feels safe. The world has become too terrifying for her to engage with. The doctor's words were like knives in Julian's heart. He had been 6 months late. 6 months of this private hell for a little girl who had already lost her father. He pushed his own guilt aside. It was a useless emotion. Action was what mattered now. What does she need? Safety, patience, consistency, and a specialist. I know a child psychologist, Dr. Lena Hansen. She's the best. But first, Julian, she needs to know she's safe with you. Armed with the medical report, Julian's next call was to his lawyer, Marcus Thorne, Eris's brother. Marcus was a bulldog in a bespoke suit, a man who wielded the law like a weapon. Julian relayed the events of the afternoon, his voice a low, controlled monotone that belied the fury simmering beneath. Marcus listened without interruption. When Julian finished, there was a moment of silence on the line. Julian, Marcus said, his voice grim. This is worse than we could have imagined. David's will makes you her legal guardian in the event of his death, but Eleanor, as his wife, was granted primary custody. It was standard. He never would have. He couldn't have known. He knew she was cold, Marcus. He just thought it was social ambition. Not this. Not a monster. We can file an emergency petition for custody based on the medical report, Marcus advised. But it will get ugly. Eleanor will fight. She'll use her money and social standing to paint you as an unstable, interfering outsider. She'll drag Maya through court, force her to testify. It could traumatize her all over again. There has to be another way, Julian insisted. A way to neutralize her completely, to remove her from the board so thoroughly she can never touch Maya again. To do that, you need more than a doctor's report and a child's drawing. You need irrefutable proof. You need to dismantle her public image so utterly that no one will ever believe a word she says again. You need to find her motive, her weakness, and you need to expose it to the world. While Maya slept soundly for the first time in months, sedated and safe in a private room at the clinic with Nurse Clara watching over her, Julian began his war. He retreated to a secure penthouse suite he maintained in the city, a place that was more a command center than a home. He turned it into the nerve center of his investigation. He and Marcus whiteboarded a strategy. They needed leverage. Financial, social, personal. Anything that would crack Eleanor's perfect facade. Julian started with the money. David had been a wealthy man, with a significant portfolio and a multimillion-dollar trust for Maya. As executor of the will, Julian had access to the financials. He spent the night poring over spreadsheets and bank statements, his sharp mind cutting through the complex legal jargon. It didn't take long to find the anomalies. Large, regular withdrawals from Maya's trust, funneled through a series of shell corporations. The money wasn't being used for Maya's care. It was being used to fund Eleanor's lavish lifestyle, her designer wardrobe, her charity donations, the very building blocks of her public persona. She was stealing from a child to build a pedestal for herself. It was motive. It was leverage. But it wasn't enough. A financial crime could be explained away, spun by clever lawyers. He needed something more personal, more visceral. The next day, he went back to the neighborhood. He drove past the house, which sat silent and imposing, a dark spot on the otherwise sunny street. He parked a block away and walked, observing. He needed to find the reluctant witness, the person who had seen something but was too afraid to speak. His eyes settled on the house next door, a smaller, immaculately kept cottage with a vibrant rose garden out front. He remembered David mentioning the old woman who lived there, Mrs. Gable, a widow who had been in the neighborhood for 50 years. He found her tending her roses, her hands protected by thick gardening gloves. She was a small, frail-looking woman with kind, worried eyes. When she saw Julian approaching, her eyes widened, and she immediately looked away, becoming intensely interested in pruning a perfectly healthy rosebush. She was afraid. Julian didn't loom over her. He stopped at her picket fence, keeping a respectful distance. "Mrs. Gable? My name is Julian Croft. I was a friend of David Vance." "I know who you are," she said, her voice thin and reedy. She still wouldn't look at him. "I saw you yesterday, with the little girl." "I'm worried about Maya," Julian said simply. He didn't accuse, he didn't demand. He just stated a simple, honest truth. Mrs. Gable snipped a rose with a sharp crack of her shears. "She's a powerful woman, that one," she whispered, her words meant for the roses. "So many important friends. It's not my place to say anything." "David told me you were the heart of this neighborhood," Julian said, his voice gentle. "He said you looked out for everyone. He said you brought Maya cookies when she was learning to ride her bike." A single tear traced a path through the wrinkled landscape of her cheek. She finally looked at him, her eyes full of a sorrow that mirrored his own. He was a good man, a wonderful father. After he was gone, it all changed. The laughter stopped. I used to hear Maya playing in the garden, her little voice chattering away. Then nothing. Just silence. She lowered her voice even more. Sometimes at night I'd hear things, a different kind of sound. Her crying. And Eleanor's voice, so sharp, so cold, like a razor blade. I told myself it was none of my business. An old woman shouldn't meddle. It is your business, Julian said softly. It's all of our business. Did you ever see anything else? Mrs. Gable wrung her gloved hands. The playhouse. David built it for her, her special castle. She loved it more than anything. After Eleanor took over, she wasn't allowed in it anymore. I saw Eleanor lock it with a padlock one day. The girl just stood at the window watching. It broke my heart. The playhouse. Another lock. Another prison. A new piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Thank you, Mrs. Gable, Julian said. You've been more help than you know. He left her there, among her roses, a silent ally in a war she didn't want to fight. He now had a target. He needed to get back into that house, into that garden. He needed to see what was inside Maya's castle. The key to Eleanor's destruction, he felt with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, was locked away inside that tiny wooden house. Julian knew a frontal assault on the house was impossible. Eleanor would be on high alert. He needed a key, a way in that was both legal and subtle. Marcus provided it. As the co-executor of David's estate, Julian had the legal right to inspect the property for insurance and appraisal purposes, provided he gave formal notice. Marcus drafted and sent a crisp, official letter to Eleanor's lawyer, informing them that an appraiser, accompanied by Mr. Croft, would be arriving in 2 days to assess the property's condition, including all outbuildings. It was a perfect, ironclad pretext. While they waited, Julian focused on Maya. He brought her from the clinic to his penthouse, which his staff had transformed overnight. One of the spare bedrooms was now a little girl's dream, filled with soft blankets, colorful pillows, and a menagerie of stuffed animals. Art supplies and books covered a small table. It was a stark contrast to the sterile prison she had left behind. He hired Dr. Lena Hansen, the child psychologist Dr. Thorne had recommended. She was a warm, patient woman with a calming presence. She didn't push Maya to talk about what happened. Instead, she sat on the floor with her, drawing and playing with clay. The goal right now isn't to get her to speak, Lena explained to Julian. It's to let her know that this is a place where she can be silent and still be safe. The words will come when she's ready. Julian watched them for hours. He saw flickers of the little girl he remembered. A small smile when a clay dog she made didn't fall over. A moment of intense focus as she colored a sky a brilliant, hopeful shade of blue. She was still a ghost, but she was a ghost beginning to remember how to be alive. She never let him out of her sight. If he went to another room, her small shadow would follow. At night, she'd wake from nightmares, and he would sit by her bed until she fell back asleep, his large, calloused hand resting gently on her forehead. In her silent, terrified presence, the ghosts of his own past, the sister he couldn't save from a cruel world, began to quiet down. Maya wasn't just his mission. She was becoming his anchor. The day of the appraisal arrived. Julian, along with a stoic, professional appraiser named Mr. Harris, arrived at the Vance estate precisely at the scheduled time. Eleanor met them at the door. If she was nervous, she didn't show it. She was once again the picture of polished grace, the charming hostess. "Gentlemen, please come in. The house is all yours. Anything you need, just ask." She was confident, arrogant even. She believed her secrets were safe. Julian let the appraiser do his work inside the main house while he walked out into the backyard. The garden was as immaculately manicured as the front lawn, but it felt just as sterile. The swing set David had built sat motionless. The sandbox was covered, and at the far end of the yard, tucked under the shade of a large oak tree, was the playhouse. It was a charming miniature cottage, painted white with blue trim, and just as Mrs. Gable had said, a heavy brass padlock was latched onto the small door. Eleanor followed him out onto the patio. "A charming little thing, isn't it?" she said, sipping a glass of iced tea. David was so proud of it. Maya never uses it anymore. Children lose interest so quickly. The appraiser needs to see inside all structures on the property, Julian said, his eyes fixed on the lock. We'll need the key. A flicker of unease crossed her face. Oh dear, I'm afraid I have no idea where it is. It's been lost for ages. It's probably just full of spiders now anyway. Then I'm afraid we'll have to cut the lock, Julian said calmly. It's a legal necessity for the estate's valuation. He had anticipated this. In his pocket was a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters he had brought from his car. Eleanor's composure finally cracked. You can't be serious. You'll ruin the door. This is unnecessary harassment, Julian. It's procedure, Julian said, his voice flat. He walked to the playhouse, the bolt cutters feeling heavy and purposeful in his hand. He didn't look back at her. He placed the jaws of the cutters around the shank of the padlock. Eleanor let out a small gasp of protest, but she didn't move to stop him. She knew she was legally trapped. With a sharp, satisfying snap, the lock broke. Julian pulled it free and tossed it aside. He took a deep breath and pulled open the small door. The air that wafted out was stale and musty. The inside was dark, the small windows caked with dirt. He stepped inside, his large frame filling the tiny space. It was mostly empty, save for a small table and 2 chairs, and a thick layer of dust covering everything. Seemed Eleanor was right. It was just an empty, forgotten space. But Julian's instincts told him otherwise. Why go to the trouble of padlocking an empty shed? He ran his hand along the walls. His fingers brushed against a loose floorboard near the back wall. He knelt, his heart starting to beat faster. He pried the board up with his fingertips. And there, nestled in the dark space beneath, was a small metal box. He lifted it out. It was a simple cash box, the kind you could buy at any office supply store. It wasn't locked. He opened the lid. Inside he found 2 items. The first was a stack of papers, financial documents. It was Eleanor's secret ledger, a meticulous record of every dollar she had siphoned from Maya's trust, with notes on where the money had gone. A new car, a couture wardrobe, a donation that secured her seat on the board of the Children's Benevolence Fund. It was a roadmap of her greed. But it was the second item that made the air leave his lungs. It was a small, cheap digital voice recorder. It looked like a toy. He recognized it instantly. David had given one just like it to Maya on her 5th birthday. So she could record her important stories. He pressed the play button. The first few recordings were filled with joy. Maya's giggling voice telling a silly story about a talking squirrel. David's deep laugh in the background. Them singing a goofy, off-key song together. It was a time capsule of their happiness. A ghost of the life that had been stolen. He felt a pang of profound grief for his friend. Then he skipped forward. The date on the small screen was a week after David's funeral. He pressed play again. This time the audio was chillingly clear. Eleanor's voice, not the smooth, public melody, but a cold, sharp hiss. Stop crying. It's pathetic. Your father is gone. He is not coming back. Do you understand me? Maya's small, hiccuping sobs. I miss Daddy. You will not speak his name in this house again, Eleanor snapped. He is gone. I am in charge now. You will do as I say. You will be polite. You will be perfect. And most of all, you will be silent. No one wants to see a sad, moping child. You are an accessory, and you will behave as such. If you don't, I will lock you in here where no one can hear you scream. Do you understand? The recording ended with the sound of Maya's terrified, choked whisper. Yes. Julian listened to a dozen more recordings. Each one was a new scene in a private play of psychological torture. Eleanor belittling Maya, threatening her, telling her no one would ever love her, systematically erasing her father's memory and breaking her spirit. It was the smoking gun. It was more than leverage. It was annihilation. This recording wouldn't just cost Eleanor custody. It would expose her to the world as the soulless monster she truly was. He stood up, the small recorder clutched in his hand. A cold, hard piece of justice. He walked out of the playhouse and into the sun, blinking. Eleanor was standing on the patio, watching him, her face a pale mask of anxiety. He held up the recorder. He didn't say a word. He just let her see it. And in that moment she knew. She knew she was utterly, irrevocably finished. With the voice recorder and the secret ledger in his possession, Julian had the weapons he needed. But a weapon is useless without a strategy for its deployment. He and Marcus met late into the night, the audio from the recorder playing softly on a loop in their office, a constant, chilling reminder of the stakes. Marcus, ever the pragmatist, laid out the options. They could hand the evidence to the police and Child Protective Services immediately. It would guarantee Eleanor's arrest and the termination of her parental rights. But it would also mean a closed, quiet process. Eleanor would be punished behind the scenes, her reputation perhaps tarnished among a small circle, but the true extent of her monstrosity would be buried in sealed court documents. She built her entire world on a public lie, Julian said, his voice hard. She deserves to have that world burned down in public. Marcus nodded, a grim smile on his face. I was hoping you'd say that. She's the guest of honor at the Children's Benevolence Fund Gala in 3 days. The theme, if you can believe it, is a voice for the voiceless. The hypocrisy is poetic. The plan began to take shape. It would be a public execution, not of her body, but of her identity. They needed more than just Julian and the evidence. They needed allies who could validate the story and amplify the impact. Julian's thoughts immediately went to Mrs. Gable. She was the moral center, the witness whose simple, heartfelt testimony would resonate more than any legal document. He visited her the next morning, not with a lawyer, but alone. He found her in her garden again, as if she were a permanent fixture among the roses. He didn't show her the ledger, but he played a small, carefully chosen segment of the audio for her, just enough for her to hear Eleanor's cold, cruel tone and Maya's terrified sobs. The color drained from the old woman's face. The fear in her eyes was replaced by a slow-burning, righteous anger. That monster, she whispered, her hands trembling. I knew it. In my heart, I knew it was bad, but I never imagined. I'm going to expose her, Mrs. Gable, Julian said, at the gala, in front of everyone. But my word against hers might not be enough. They'll call me biased and interloper, but they will listen to you. You are her neighbor. You have no agenda other than the truth. He paused, letting the weight of his request settle. I need you to be there. I need you to be willing to stand up and say what you told me, that the laughter stopped, that you heard her crying. He saw the war in her eyes, the deep-seated fear of confrontation versus the fierce, protective instinct of a grandmother. I'm just an old woman, she said, her voice wavering. What can I do? You can tell the truth, Julian said gently, and I will have security there to ensure you are completely safe. I give you my word. No harm will come to you. She looked away from him, toward the silent, imposing house next door. She looked at the window she knew was Maya's. After a long moment, she turned back to Julian, her chin held high, her frail body infused with a sudden, surprising strength. David Vance was a good man, and his little girl deserves to be happy. You tell me when and where. I'll be there. His second call was to a man named Cole, a ghost from Julian's former life in special operations. Cole was a master of information and security, a man who could find a whisper in a hurricane. Julian sent him the files on Eleanor. I need everything, he told Cole. Her past, her finances before David, any other relationships. I want to know every skeleton in her closet. While Cole went to work, Julian and Marcus prepared the final pieces. They compiled the evidence into a devastatingly clear timeline. Eleanor's pre-existing debt, her calculated pursuit of the wealthy, recently widowed David, the immediate shift in her spending after his death, and the systematic psychological abuse that coincided with her draining of Maya's trust fund. 2 days before the gala, Cole called back. You were right to be suspicious of her, he said, his voice flat and professional over the encrypted line. Eleanor Vance, born Eleanor Schmidt. She has a history, left a trail of debt and broken engagements across 3 states. Her last fiancé before David, a wealthy tech entrepreneur, called it off a week before the wedding. He claimed she had forged his signature on financial documents. He was about to press charges, but then he died. A sudden, unexpected heart attack. The police ruled it natural causes. A chill went down Julian's spine. It was a pattern. A black widow. They couldn't prove she had anything to do with the man's death. But the context was damning. She wasn't just a cruel narcissist and a thief. She was a predator. The final piece of the plan involved Maya herself. Dr. Hansen had been making slow but steady progress. Maya had started to draw again, not just abstract colors, but figures, people. She drew a picture of Julian, a tall, dark figure standing beside her, holding a shield. She still wasn't speaking much, only a few whispered words here and there. Bringing her to the gala is a huge risk, Lena warned Julian. The confrontation could be deeply traumatic for her. She won't be in the room for the confrontation, Julian assured her. But I want her to be nearby, in a safe, quiet room with you. I want her to have the chance, if she feels ready, to see that the monster has been vanquished. I want her to see that she is finally truly safe. Lena considered this. It has to be her choice. We can prepare her, tell her that a bad person is going to be told to go away and can never hurt her again. We see if she wants to be there for that. But we can't force her. The stage was set. The evidence was compiled. The allies were in place. The trap was laid. All they had to do now was wait for the guest of honor to walk into it. Eleanor, blinded by her own arrogance, had no idea the storm that was about to break over her head. But she was not entirely idle. Sensing that Julian's silence was a threat, not a retreat, she decided to launch a preemptive strike. 2 days before the gala, she played her trump card. She went to the police and, with a masterful performance of a distraught, terrified mother, filed a report against Julian Croft for parental kidnapping. She told them a story of a troubled, grieving child being manipulated and abducted by an unstable and obsessive family friend who was trying to contest the will. She used her social connections to leak the story to a prominent gossip columnist. The next morning, the headline was splashed across the internet. Billionaire playboy Julian Croft in custody battle, kidnaps goddaughter from grieving widow. The police arrived at Julian's penthouse with a warrant. Marcus was already there, having been alerted by his contacts. He met them calmly, presenting David's will which clearly named Julian as Maya's legal guardian, and the notarized medical report from Dr. Thorne detailing the evidence of neglect. The police were professional but caught in the middle of a high-profile mess. They couldn't arrest Julian, but they couldn't ignore Eleanor's claims either. A formal investigation was opened. The move was a masterstroke of malicious strategy. It shifted the narrative. Julian was no longer the silent protector. He was now the accused. It cast a shadow of doubt over his motives. Eleanor wasn't just a victim. She was a mother fighting for her child. The media frenzy was instantaneous. Reporters camped outside Julian's building. Eleanor gave a tearful, exclusive interview to a sympathetic television host, clutching a photo of her and a smiling Maya. "I just want my daughter back," she sobbed, dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief. "I'm so worried for her safety." Julian watched the interview from his command center, a cold, calm fury settling over him. "She's good," he admitted to Marcus. "She's a professional." "It doesn't matter," Marcus said, his eyes fixed on the screen. "A lie is a house of cards. The bigger it is, the more spectacular the collapse. She's just raised the stakes. When we expose her now, she won't just fall. She'll evaporate." The attack solidified the resolve of their small band of allies. Mrs. Gable, horrified by the news reports, called Julian. "That woman is the devil herself," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "Lying like that to the whole world. Don't you worry, Mr. Croft. I'll be there. I'll tell them all what I saw." The countermove had failed to intimidate them. Instead, it had poured gasoline on a fire that was already burning hot. Eleanor, in her arrogance, believed she had won. She believed she had successfully painted Julian as a villain and herself as the victim, solidifying her position just in time for her grandest performance at the gala. She had no idea that she wasn't securing her throne. She was merely building her own scaffold. The night of the gala was fast approaching. and with it, the promise of a reckoning that would be swift, public, and absolute. The grand ballroom of the Regent Hotel was a symphony of opulence and self-congratulation. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto tables laden with orchids and champagne flutes. The city's elite, dressed in glittering gowns and sharp tuxedos, mingled and laughed, their checkbooks open for a good cause. On a large banner behind the stage, the theme of the evening was displayed in elegant script, a night of hope for forgotten children, and at the center of it all, the star of the evening, was Eleanor Vance. She was radiant, dressed in a shimmering silver gown that caught the light with every move. She glided through the room, accepting compliments, offering tragic, brave smiles, and speaking in hushed, heartfelt tones about her passion for helping the less fortunate. She was playing the role of her life, the benevolent, grieving widow, a saint in couture. To the assembled crowd, she was an inspiration. To Julian, watching from a monitor in a holding room down the hall, she was a viper in a jewel box. He was dressed in a simple, perfectly tailored black suit. He looked calm, but inside, his senses were on fire. Marcus stood beside him, a leather portfolio containing their evidence held firmly in his hand. Cole was on the floor, moving silently through the crowd, coordinating with the hotel's security, whom he had already briefed. In a quiet suite on the floor above, Dr. Hansen sat with Maya, reading her a story. Maya knew that her Uncle Julian was going to make sure the mean lady went away forever. She had chosen a simple blue dress to wear for the occasion. At precisely 9 o'clock, the Master of Ceremonies took the stage and, after a fawning introduction, welcomed the evening's guest of honor, Mrs. Eleanor Vance. The room erupted in applause. Eleanor walked to the podium, her expression a perfect blend of humility and sorrow. She waited for the applause to die down, then placed a delicate hand on her heart. "Thank you," she began, her voice trembling slightly for effect. "Thank you all for being here. This cause, a voice for the voiceless, has become so deeply personal to me, especially in recent weeks." Her eyes filled with tears. "As many of you know, my own precious daughter, Maya, was recently taken from me by a man who seeks to exploit our family's tragedy for his own gain." Gasps rippled through the audience. She had their complete, undivided sympathy. "But I will not be broken," she continued, her voice rising with manufactured strength. "I will fight for my daughter, and I will fight for all the forgotten children out there who need our help. We must be their voice. We must be their shield." As she finished her speech to a thunderous standing ovation, Julian gave a nod to Marcus. It was time. They didn't burst in. They walked. Julian entered the ballroom from a side entrance, Marcus and the frail but resolute Mrs. Gable at his side. He moved with a quiet, deliberate purpose that cut through the celebratory atmosphere like a surgeon's scalpel. A hush fell over the room as people recognized him from the news. The media, present to cover the gala, swarmed toward him, cameras flashing, microphones extended. Julian ignored them all. His eyes were locked on the stage on Eleanor. Her face, flushed with triumph, turned pale with shock, then contorted into a mask of pure fury. "Security!" she shrieked into the microphone. "Get him out of here. This man is a kidnapper. He's trespassing." Hotel security moved to intercept, but Cole was there first, flashing his credentials and speaking in a low, authoritative voice. The guards hesitated, confused. It was all the time Julian needed. He walked up the small set of stairs to the stage and took the second microphone from its stand. "My name is Julian Croft," he said, his voice calm and clear, amplified throughout the silent ballroom. "And I am Maya Vance's godfather and legal guardian, appointed by her father, my best friend, Sergeant David Vance." He turned to Eleanor, his eyes like chips of ice. "You speak of giving a voice to the voiceless, Eleanor. Let's start with Maya." He nodded to Marcus, who connected a small device to the ballroom's state-of-the-art sound system. First, an image flashed on the large screens behind the stage. The financial ledger he had found in the playhouse, with the embezzled funds highlighted in red. For the past year, Julian's voice boomed, Eleanor Vance has systematically stolen over $2 million from her 6-year-old stepdaughter's trust fund to finance the very lifestyle you all admire tonight. The crowd murmured, a wave of shock and disbelief spreading through the room. Eleanor's face was ashen. Lies. These are forged documents. He's a monster, trying to ruin me. A monster, Julian repeated softly. Let's talk about monsters. And then he played the audio. Eleanor's voice, her true voice, filled the vast, silent space. Cold, cruel, vicious. Stop crying. It's pathetic. You will not speak his name in this house again. You are an accessory, and you will behave as such. If you don't, I will lock you in here where no one can hear you scream. Maya's terrified, choked sobs echoed off the crystal chandeliers. The sound was so raw, so filled with pain, that several people in the audience gasped, their hands flying to their mouths. The atmosphere in the room had turned from celebration to a funeral. Eleanor stared, horrified, her mind racing to find a lie big enough to cover this. That's not me. It's fake. It's an actress he hired. Is this an actress, too? Julian asked, his voice gentle as he turned and offered a hand to Mrs. Gable. The elderly woman walked to the podium, her hands trembling but her voice surprisingly strong. My name is Martha Gable. I live next door, she said, looking out at the sea of stunned faces. I heard her. I heard that poor child crying, day after day. I saw the fear in her eyes. The laughter in that house died the day David Vance did. And this woman is the one who killed it. The simple, honest testimony of the old woman was devastating. It was the truth, unadorned and undeniable. Eleanor was cornered, her lies crumbling around her. She looked wildly around the room, searching for a friendly face, a supporter, but she found only disgust and condemnation. Then came the final, killing blow. A side door opened, and Dr. Hansen walked in, holding Maya's hand. The little girl in the blue dress did not look scared. She looked small, but she stood tall. She walked to the front of the stage, her eyes fixed on the woman who had haunted her nightmares. Eleanor saw her and something inside her broke. Maya, darling, she cried, a desperate, last-ditch attempt to play the loving mother. Tell them how this bad man took you away from me. Maya looked at the woman on the stage. She looked at the crowd. And then she looked at Julian, who gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. She took a deep breath. Her voice, when it came, was not a whisper. It was clear and strong and carried a truth that shattered the last of Eleanor's lies. You're not my mommy, Maya said, pointing a small, steady finger. You're a monster, and I'm not afraid of you anymore. It was over. The single, pure truth from the mouth of a child had done what 1,000 legal documents could not. It had judged her, convicted her, and sentenced her in the court of public opinion. Eleanor let out a primal scream of rage and despair. It was not the sound of a grieving mother, but of a predator whose prey had just turned and ripped out its throat. Her carefully constructed world, her beautiful lies, all of it had been incinerated in the space of 10 minutes. As she began to scream obscenities, a torrent of vile hatred directed at the child on the stage, 2 uniformed police officers, pre-alerted by Marcus, walked calmly onto the stage. They took her by the arms. She didn't fight. She had simply collapsed, a hollow shell of rage and defeat. The last thing the audience saw of the beautiful, benevolent Eleanor Vance was her being led away in disgrace, her silver gown now looking like a cheap, tinseled costume. Julian walked over to Maya, knelt down and wrapped her in his arms. The room erupted, not in applause, but in a quiet, stunned murmur, the sound of a collective illusion being shattered. Justice had not just been served. It had been televised. The fall of Eleanor Vance was as swift as it was absolute. With the audio recordings, the financial evidence, the testimony of Mrs. Gable, and the damning information Cole had uncovered about her past, the district attorney had an airtight case. Faced with overwhelming evidence and public scorn, Eleanor confessed to everything in a pathetic attempt to secure a plea bargain. She was convicted on multiple counts of child abuse, embezzlement, and fraud. The judge, calling her actions a case of profound and calculated cruelty, sentenced her to the maximum prison term, ensuring she would never harm another child again. Her name became a cautionary tale among the city's elite, a synonym for deceit and hidden evil. For Julian and Maya, the verdict was merely a formality. Their new life had already begun the moment they walked out of that ballroom. Julian, using his immense resources, liquidated all his assets in the city that held so many painful memories. He bought a sprawling, secluded property on the coast, a house of glass and wormwood perched on a cliff overlooking the endless blue of the ocean. It was a fortress of peace, a world away from the cold marble and locked doors of Maya's former life. He formally adopted her. The process was expedited by the courts, with David's will and Eleanor's conviction leaving no room for objection. Julian Croft, the reclusive billionaire, the hardened soldier, became a father, and Maya Vance, the silent, haunted victim, became Maya Croft, a little girl with a future. The first few months were quiet. Healing was not a single event, but a slow, gentle process, like the turning of the tide. Julian and Dr. Hansen, who now visited them at their new home, never pushed Maya. They simply created an environment of unconditional safety and patience. Julian taught her how to skip stones on the water. They built elaborate sandcastles and let the waves wash them away, a lesson in letting go. They planted a garden filled with bright, cheerful flowers. Maya began to change. The hollow look in her eyes was slowly replaced by a spark of curiosity, then of joy. She started to speak more, her voice growing stronger and more confident each day. She asked questions about everything, about the starfish in the tide pools, about the constellations in the night sky, about her father. Julian answered every question with gentle honesty. He told her stories about David, about his bravery, his kindness, his goofy laugh. He filled the house with photos of her father, reclaiming his memory from the silence Eleanor had imposed. He was giving Maya back her past, not as a source of pain, but as a foundation of love upon which she could build her future. Julian was changing, too. The rigid discipline of the soldier was softening, replaced by the gentle patience of a parent. The ghosts of his own past began to fade in the bright light of Maya's smile. The hole in his heart, a space he thought would forever be empty, was being filled by the fierce, profound love he felt for this resilient little girl. He wasn't just her protector anymore. She was his purpose. He was no longer a man haunted by who he couldn't save, but a man defined by the one he had. One sunny afternoon, about a year after they had moved to the coast, Julian was sitting on the porch, reading a book, when Maya came running up to him from the garden, her hands covered in dirt and her face beaming. She was holding something behind her back. "I have a surprise for you, Daddy," she said. The word daddy, still new and precious, a sound that made Julian's heart ache with a beautiful, unfamiliar joy. "A surprise?" he asked, putting his book down. "What is it?" She revealed what she was hiding. It was a drawing. It was a picture of their house on the cliff, under a bright, smiling sun. In front of the house were two figures. One was a tall man with dark hair. The other was a little girl with a big smile and curly hair, holding his hand. Above their heads, she had drawn a big red heart. Julian took the drawing, his throat tight with emotion. He looked from the simple, powerful image to the bright, happy face of the little girl standing before him. The silent victim was gone. In her place was a child, vibrant and whole, her voice clear, her spirit unbroken. He had promised to give her back the sun, and here it was, shining brightly on a piece of paper, a testament to their shared victory over the darkness. He pulled her into a hug, burying his face in her hair, which now smelled of sunshine and salt water. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he whispered. They framed the drawing and hung it in the center of their home, a constant reminder that even after the most terrible of storms, the sun will always, eventually, return. The world is full of locked doors, and behind them, silent struggles often unfold, hidden from a world that is too busy or too afraid to look. Evil, true evil, rarely announces itself with thunder and lightning. It often wears a beautiful mask, speaks with a charming voice, and wins the applause of the crowd. It thrives in the shadows of public approval, feeding on the vulnerability of those it can isolate and control. But goodness, true goodness, is often quiet. It is the steady gaze that sees past the facade. It is the patient hand that reaches out in the dark. It is the unwavering courage that chooses to listen, not to the loudest voice in the room, but to the silence. True strength is not the power to dominate, but the will to protect. This story is a reminder that heroes do not always wear capes. Sometimes, they are simply the ones who refuse to look away, who have the courage to break down the door and let in the light. How many masks do we walk past every day, never questioning the perfect smiles? How many silent pleas for help go unheard because we have forgotten how to listen to what is not being said? The smallest act of attention, of daring to ask if everything is all right, can be the key that unlocks a prison. We sincerely hope this story of courage, rescue, and healing has touched your heart. The journey from darkness to light is one we all understand in our own ways. If you have a story about a quiet hero who made a difference in your life or the life of someone you know, we would be honored if you shared it in the comments below. Your stories are a testament to the enduring power of compassion. Thank you for reading, and may you always have the courage to be a voice for the voiceless.